I keep bees in western Wisconsin in Hudson, and I believe that this lecture will probably be on the Treatment-Free Beekeepers channel later on YouTube at some stage. And so I'll just start. I believe that this is the way we should be wintering bees. There were 175 frames dedicated to 17 colonies in this apiary. I had 16 of them survive the winter of 2014-15. It illustrates my nuke wintering principles. They are shielded from the northern winds, insulated, clustered and packed with stored honey, syrup and bees. These are my overwintering survival numbers for all of my colonies up until this spring of 2015 to 2016. When the current year is over, I'll have the next year's on there. This past year has been a tougher winter. I haven't done as well. I'm at about 40%. When I started this, I was hoping to get by with 50%. It's been better than that, and so Mel might be a optimist. I'm a pessimist, because pessimists get more pleasant surprises than optimists. I got, what I want you to note here is I got by this far just by only buying a total of 5 packages and a handful of queens.
Why did you buy this package?
You have to start with something. Bees don't just, well, bees didn't just appear. I had to have something, and I didn't know anything when I started, so.
2011, 2012, you had 21 out of 21, and yet you bought 2 more packages.
Yeah, because that, I bought those, and I didn't know how it was going to go. I didn't necessarily have any confidence that it was going to work. So, like everybody else, that's why I bought bees. People, when you buy packages or order nukes, you have to get ahead. So until you've established a degree of confidence, you don't know what's going to happen. I started nuking with the thought that if I went into winter with twice the number of colonies that I planned to run the following spring, I would be okay if half of them died. The survival, as I say, has been better than that. So I believe that if you need to either build or buy nuke boxes or divided deeps and give it a whirl, if you want to improve your survival rate. Mike Palmer and Mel Dissel can say, start with the bees you have and go from there. The important thing is to start. I don't care if you medicate, count as many mites as you want to. Nobody has yet quantified the impact of broodbreak on mite density in northern climates, and if you count mites, perhaps that could be your contribution. A question I get is, can you make honey from an overwintered nuke? And the answer is yes. You'll notice that there I left out the 2009 because in 2009 I didn't make any honey. I just made some bees. I put a nuke in 10 frame equipment, run it for honey. I don't split it, but I do balance brood before the main flow, trying to ensure that each colony has approximately the same strength, as I am not tall enough for skyscraper hives.
Excuse me, Adrian, can you back up one slide?
Sure.
Those were honey production off of nukes that you made the previous year, correct?
Exactly. That's
now,
it.
Do you have anything to compare it with? Do you have any full-size overwintered hives that made honey the next year? Compare those poundage.
That's it.
I also
Yeah.
nukes, and I found that my overwintered nukes actually outproduce my overwintered full-size hives. I'm just wondering if you're seeing the same thing.
I don't, because what I do is if I've made a hive and made a nuke and it produces honey in the second year and then it overwinters again, then I'll use that stock and split it like Mel does, because that's demonstrated it's working. I don't try and go for consecutive years. This slide is about Varroa mites and Varroa. Go on.
Sorry to back up, but how many frames are in those nucs that are making honey for you when you start them up?
I'll come to that in a minute for you.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Varroa mites are here to stay, and they have to be dealt with. There needs to be a strategy, and any beekeeping system is not complete without a strategy that accounts for mites one way or another. And I'm aware of 3 methods to deal with mites, and it's important to pick at least one if you want your bees to stay alive. Nuc equipment by itself is not a panacea for mite problems. I have only a little experience with the chemical medical model. I sugar dusted for mites in 2010, and I fed my last fumigillin for Nosema in 2012. I don't put any other drugs or chemicals in my hives. I haven't since. So the bee-based. Bees can be selected for traits that are important in their health and reduce the need to medicate them. The holy grail of beekeeping is a mite-resistant bee. However, because there is little beekeeper control in naturally mated honeybees, there is no chance that I'm going to find that holy grail by myself. I believe we need beekeeper to beekeeper cooperation on a local level to find bees that will work for us. Now, the Varroa mite, as Mel explained, can only reproduce on a bee larva. A manipulation broodbreak system is my chosen method of mite control. By luck, observation, innovation, and especially imitation, thank you to Mel, I've arrived at a system that adds the enforced early summer broodbreak to that long, cold, dark broodbreak that we otherwise call winter. So I'll explain what a broodbreak is. Mel explained it, but I'll do it again because I think it's really important. A broodbreak is a period during which there are no larval cells for the Varroa mite to enter to reproduce upon, and no sealed brood containing Varroa. In other words, a broodbreak is a complete pause in the reproduction of both honeybees and Varroa mites. The pause is harder on Varroa than the honeybee. My system adds a broodbreak in June, so the broodbreak that winter brings, we get 2. Now, talking of winter, Californians don't see much of a winter. So let's talk briefly about California. California grows nuts and fruit. And I don't know if you can see it, they've got that little text at the bottom of this. It says, "I'll eat oranges for you, and you may throw snowballs for me." Now, how offensive is that? I'm offended. And they don't need money. They can find gold laying on the ground. And you are probably thinking, what has California got to do with our beekeeping? And the answer is everything. Many of the bees that are raised here are bought in packages or in queen cages from California. And I don't believe there's any reason that we should continue to do that if we can teach each other how to deal with Varroa mites and overwinter nucs. So what can we do? Well, beekeepers in the north are finding out that going into winter with more home-raised nucs than you expect to need keeps northern beekeepers' gold in northern beekeepers' pockets. What a boon it would be to our region if we can keep that money in our pockets. This is a screenshot from the Northern Bee Network's website, where Megan Gilbraith from Michigan, Mel's home state, is promoting northern bees. And a poke around on that site revealed a list of 19 beekeepers offering nucs, northern nucs, for sale in Michigan, all of whom were sold out. Mel is from Michigan. Michigan's not that far over. There's no reason we can't do it. In River Falls, Wisconsin, Brad Mogan, a professor there, summed it up nicely. Nucs are created by splitting a regular hive into 3 smaller hives. They're smaller, but if they overwinter, you can get them started earlier in spring, they build up, and if you lose one of those 3, you've lost 30%. You still have 2 hives, Mogan said. You always have a replacement stock of honeybees, and you've selected them because they've overwintered in those nucs. They're probably in good shape. Now, he didn't mention brood breaks in the article, but he's clearly understanding the value of nucs. The final line of the article quotes Mogan as saying, beekeeping's got to be more of a regional industry. It can happen here, we can do it. In bee culture, at March, this is Larry Connor. You can barely read bee magazines without coming across nucs. To maintain a sustainable apiary, the beekeeper must be on a management plan of continuous renewal and rebuilding, and the beekeeper must adapt a program of bringing in mite and disease tolerant stock, having desired queens on hand at all times to form a system of backup nuclei. That's a hell of a run-on sentence, but I got through it. So what I've done with the slides up to this point is to try to present a case for change, to show that overwintering nucs has become more mainstream, and that beekeepers will be better off financially and happier if more of us overwintered nucs from our own stock. Next part we'll deal with the what and the how. Now, there are many different definitions and versions of a nuc. In my apiary, when I talk about a nuc, I'm talking about a colony established in 5 drawn frames, to which a second level of drawn frames is added and drawn. This colony is then overwintered for sale, honey production, or to make increase from the following year. In essence, a nuc is a smaller colony of bees, usually in skinny boxes of 4 or 5 frames wide, or 2 colonies in a divided nuc box. I came across the method I am using by combining nuking from Mike Palmer, a beekeeper from Vermont, with brood breaking from Mel Disselkin. Mike's information you can find on YouTube, and Mel's you can go after the break and listen to him again, because he's the man. What I take from Mike is the value of skinny boxes and the importance of using nucs as the backbone of your apiary. If you are curious, go on to Beesource. He's quite active on Beesource as well. And what Mike says, is this is how we get early queens in the north. You think of them as queens with support staff. That's what nucs are. Nucs keep them in cold storage. And this is Mel. Though I don't need to say anything about Mel, you've got him next door. But Mel has a bunch of interesting things to say, and this quote really resonated with me. The art of beekeeping does not require full-strength hives at all times of the year, only during your surplus honey flows. In other words, you don't need huge populations to overwinter. This is a critical departure when one thinks of how we traditionally overwinter bees in this area. Mel's book, we'll move away from that because Mel's got it out there. So this is an overview of the system that I use. It's perennial in that you should be done buying bees, and biennial as I only expect to get 2 years out of a colony treatment free. We nurture 1 year and we exploit the next. A colony established in June to July with 2 to 3 frames of brood and a queen cell, the brood break, in the 4 or 5 frame box on drawn combs will draw out a second box of 4 to 5 frame combs and be up to weight by winter in my area if it's fed just 2 to 3 gallons of syrup or pro-sweet. Now, for people who enter this endeavor with a little trepidation, I want to be absolutely clear that in the third bullet, It's the second year honey producing colony that will likely die, not you, the honey producer. that second year, the overwintered nuke can be a honey producer, but without a summer brood break, it may die. Now, if you give it a few gallons of syrup and it lives, it helps you in the quest of finding the holy grail of bees, a more mite-tolerant bee. But the system is predicated on you making replacement bees so that you don't have to buy packages and bees. The fourth bullet, the system is not meant for any region that doesn't have a good cold winter that stops brood rearing. And lastly, it relies on overwintered colonies which are grown until June into a double deep 10 frame equipment and then to be split and to grow on to the next year's replacement bees. Now, let's just check. I want to check that I address your question about the honey producing when I come on. If not, I'll address it now. I'm nothing without a script. I don't, so I'll tell you now. So what I do is, when the weather is warmer, and I've got 4 to 5 sealed frames of brood in that 5/5 overwintered nuke, then I'll take that nuke and I'll put it in a 10 frame box and spread it right out. And spreading it right out and then putting another box of frames or a box of foundation on the top and raising up another frame takes the swarm right out of it. If you keep it in that box, it will swarm. The trick is to sell it before it swarms. Nobody wants to buy a post-swarm box of bees. Yeah. Now, so this system parallels what Mel has been saying. What you do is you start with an overwintered colony and remove the queen a week before natural swarming. You can use purchased queen cells, preferably local, or those the colony makes to queen the splits by using Mel's OTS method. Going by timing, Mel was talking about timing and when to do it, and by natural swarming. And he talks about June and July being the best time. I find this to be true. I believe that one of the reasons I have worse survival this particular year is I started too early. I started in May, and that gave them too long to have too many uninterrupted brood cycles. And Mel's point that the post-solstice queen lays faster may have something to do with that, but I can't prove that. I think it's too many cycles. It was too many cycles of mites. A little more detail. So this slide shows why the system is not suitable for first-year beekeepers, because it's quite involved. Early June, find the marked queen, remove her and a couple of frames of brood into a nuke. Separate those away from the parent colony. You can replace those frames with drawn frames if you have them, undrawn if you don't, and notch cells, just like Mel Disselkin says, in his style. And then 7 days later, on division day, I come back and divide the parent colony on its hive site 4 or 5 ways. It's like dealing cards. A frame with a queen cell for each, 2 sealed frames of brood for each, honey for each, and empties to fill the boxes. You reduce the entrances and weight. Now, splitting needs to be planned and laid out ahead of time to make it go as quickly as possible. I use plenty of smoke and all of my protective wear. Sometimes division day, D-Day, happens in the rain, and the bees will receive me like the Germans received the Allies in World War II. They attempt to staple my socks to my ankles, but it has to be done, rain or shine. If you delay the splitting, the first virgin out will emerge and either swarm or kill her sisters. I have a different point of view to the one that we usually hear. I know that perfectly good queens can be raised in our area when the conditions are right, by the bees themselves, because it's the bees who are the experts in queen rearing. By 3 weeks, the queens should be laying. You can add robbing screens and reduce entrances to make sure we don't get robbed out. When there are several frames of new brood in that box that we started originally, I add a second box of undrawn frames. I add a frame of brood is raised up from the bottom box into the second box, and an undrawn frame is placed in the bottom box. And the frames either side of that drawn sealed brood are empties, and the bees go right up there and start to work in that box as they emerge. The colony grows that way, and then by mid-August the main flow is gone, and I feed to a minimum of 50 pounds of stores and bees by mid-September. I find that I don't need to feed at all until August. There's splits when they're made up and separated, never have to be fed. During that time, when they've got no brood to raise, a couple of things are going on. They have no brood to raise, so there is fewer mouths to feed, and just like Mel said, the bees either gather nectar or they raise brood. There's no brood to raise, so they gather nectar. There we go. Now, if you do make a nuke differently, you can make a nuke differently with a queen cell that you might get from someone and some sealed frames of brood. And if you do that, then you will need to feed earlier, because there won't be a population of foragers to supply the needs. Now, I'll move on to the equipment. I use 9-inch wide boxes and 5 of Man Lake's black plastic frames. If you make your own equipment, then and you're using black plastic frames, then the 9-inch wide boxes are okay. But if by any chance you're using those antiquated wooden frames that seem so popular, then 9 inches is not going to be enough. You either want 9 1/4 or wider. Man Lake's wooden box is 9 5/8. With the way wooden frames are, that's probably okay. For me, I settled on 9 inches, and so it's 9 inches till I die, because I've got too many boxes made like this. And for my plastic frames, it works just fine. I use a plastic feed bag in a cover. This is a woven polypropylene bag. If you know anybody with chickens or feed bags, you can use that. That goes on the top. Now, I've had colony collapse disorder with my chickens. My chickens are all dead. It took me quite a while to kill them, but they're dead. And so I don't have any feed bags anymore. So I was investigating other sources, because I don't know too many people with chickens, and this material seems to have great promise to me. This is a woven polypropylene that's used in outside greenhouses. And because it's in outside greenhouses, it's UV resistant, and additionally it's also see-through. So if you have that actually on top of your colony, you could just lift up your insulation cover and see where the bees are and how big the cluster is. I tried going to one of the fabric stores or whatever it was, and I bought some vinyl, and the vinyl is nice because it's see-through and you can see that, but it was too thick, and then I'm worried about when I squish my boxes together it'll lift up, whereas this stuff just bends. The 9-inch boxes I make is just plain rabbit joints. Whatever width you settle on for boxes, I find that this was a really easy way on the table saw. That is 3/4 of an inch, which is the width of the box. I use the same setting on the saw for the top space, and also the same depth, 3/8, and so they just fit like that. I have a cleat that I have on the ends of the boxes, and then I have a 3/4 inch auger hole 3 inches down from the top. I'm happy with upper entrances. I prefer upper entrances to top entrances. That's one of those things where it might just be beekeeper preference. Some of the reasons our bees survive, it's despite us, not because of us. No, 100% sure. I use a basic bottom board and a little entrance reducer I made myself. If you're a home woodworker, when you make the rails, make them a hair over 3/4. Then all you've got to do is your entrance reducer will be a little bit below, and they can propylize it in. If you make them the same height and then you paint it, you can't get your entrance reducers in, and you feel pretty stupid. All right, Jim?
It's an excuse to buy a planer.
No, there you go. There you go. Yeah, yeah. For an outer cover, and when I first started, I used wooden outer covers, migratory type covers, and then I ended up using feed bags because they're quicker in insulation, and I've just gone for that. You have to have a rock. I didn't bring in a rock. I'm assuming you can all get rocks, but without a rock, it'll just blow straight off. And so that is how. And when they're established, that's kind of what they look like, just in a 5-frame box like that, with this closed off, and the entrance reducer down to just a B or 2's width.
So you don't add any venting on the top?
That's a good question. My setup for winter is just this one. This bottom box has that wine cork, plastic wine cork. I don't know if anybody drinks wine. The plastic wine corks are really cool, better than the corks, because you can just cut them with a knife, and you can get enough. Plastic wine corks will work for about 3 or 4 hives from one cork. Now, if you want to drink more wine, you can buy a 0.7 litre bottle instead of a 2 litre bottle, and you get 2 corks. The top, back to the ventilation question. The top box, all I have is that open in the winter, and you're giving me the really look, yeah, because everybody says that it's always the bees get too wet and they die, and I honestly wonder, well, did your bees get wet and they die, or did your bees just die and then they got wet? Who knows? But with this on the top, I saw an illustration at a Minnesota Hobby Beekeepers Association meeting I went, where this guy, what he did was, he made a solid, clear plastic, in England we call it perspex. Do you call it perspex here? The stuff that you can make for windows, but it's not glass, it's plastic. Plexiglass, thank you. He made a plexiglass cover for his 10-frame equipment, and above that he put some insulation. And when he looked, he lifted it off. The only condensation was on the outside of the walls, not below here. And so the worry about the water condensation on the cold surface dripping onto the bees, if the surface is not cold, it doesn't happen. The reason I have this feed bag in the cover on, or in this case this one, is that if you don't put it on there, the bees will chew directly into the styrofoam. If you're interested in fish, you'll find a nice collection of ant eggs between here and here too. And so they don't bother the bees much, but I've yet to find a way to market them. Put that back there.
And no screened bottom?
No. I have nothing particular against screened bottoms from the perspective of letting mites, the falling mites dropping out. But from the open ventilation at the bottom, I thought it was too much. I noticed when I tried that the bees were not using the full depth of the hive. So what I did was I ended up putting a bit of plywood under the screened bottom, thinking, okay, it can catch the mites that way. But it's a lot easier and faster to make a solid bottom board than it is to monkey around with the wire for the screen. So I moved away from that. Then where are we going now? Some pictures. Go ahead.
Is the 9-inch outside that dimension?
Yes, yeah. The inside, it's one nominal 1-inch lumber, which is 3/4 wide. So the inside space is 7.5. But like I say, if you're doing wooden frames, then that would be too little.
Now you said in your bio that you're influenced by those methods of Michael Palmer also.
Yes.
Michael Palmer advocates basically a regular deep box split as a double nuke.
Actually,
You're not using that system?
no. I'll tell you why. Because I made the first box I made was that wide, and then I made a super for it. And that very first year, I tried to winter a box like that. But I'm a bit of a dork, and so I lift the top box off and I put it aside, and then I worry about when I put it back together, whether I've got it the right way around or not, and whether I'm ending up with, I can mess up, and I didn't feel good about that. Now Mike Palmer himself, what he's done is, he's moved away, he keeps the divided boxes on the bottom, but he's gone to individual supers on the top. And I think that is a smart move, because you've got having the divider on the bottom, when you stack them on the top, they're level and they're together, and they share the heat. So I think that's a good idea.
So sharing the heat, you put 2 of these side by side then, or?
2 or 4, yes. Yeah, I'll come up to that. And so this is what it looks like when I was about to split a colony. The photos are not the best. You can't see that I've also got a couple of boxes on this side. Whoops. I know. And then at first I arranged the nucs around the original site like petals around a flower, so that the bees can become fairly evenly dispersed amongst the nucs. The nucs that have the least amount of brood get oriented in the same direction as the original hive faced to attract the most foragers and balance them out. I prefer to use a mishmash of colours to help the bees orient. After the queens have been mated and started laying, I move the boxes into a line a little at a time. I used to alternate the entrances north and south, but I've stopped alternating them north and south because I found that in the spring, when I came to the colonies that faced north, there'd be some frozen ice on the bottom board, and if you want to weigh a colony to work out how much is there, the ice doesn't help you very much, and it probably doesn't help the bees very much. I mean, there's cold storage and there's cold storage, right? So now I have them all. I have them all facing south. After you've done the division, you should have 3 to 5 colonies in individual nuc boxes to grow at least 2 high for overwintering, and the mother queen to use or dispose of. Mel says he goes ahead and he kills that queen. I have a hard time thinning carrots. I really can't do it. So unless it's from a hive that's temperament I don't like, I'll usually put her aside with a couple of frames and bees and use those bees as I want to. Now, I actually gathered some data, and I didn't know it was that 50 pounds was the right amount at first. And the first couple of years when I did this, I got really lucky because we had a really strong goldenrod flow, and it was just solid, and the boxes were above 75 pounds. If I hadn't had that, then maybe my bees would have died out and I'd be sitting at home thinking beekeeping's not for me. So you can't discount luck in your life. But this is what I've found. 2013 and 14, the weight loss by March the 9th was 24 pounds, and by 2014-15 it was 25 pounds, ranging from a minimum over the 2 years of 12 pounds to a maximum of 37. Don't get too caught up with, okay, I want that colony that was only lost 12 pounds, because that was a smaller colony. More bees tend to eat more food and start raising brood earlier. But 37 pounds, it still means you've got a couple of frames of honey throughout to keep you going. In March, it's usually warm enough to check the colonies and supplement them if you need to. I don't bother adding any pollen patties or anything until after the maple pollen has come out. I don't want to start them brood rearing any earlier than they naturally would, and I don't add many pollen patties, only if I think it's been an extended time. These are what I consider to be the essential components. A colony that's had a brood break, 50 pounds of food and bees in a 4/4 or 5/5 configuration, a top entrance, a reduced bottom entrance, raised to knee height for beekeeper convenience for my back, squeeze them together for heat conservation, and add top and side insulation, and wrap them at Thanksgiving. I want to point out that this kind of box is much easier to weigh than a 10 frame deep. People heft 10 frame deeps and say they're heavy. When you've hefted one or two, in Mike Palmer's lecture, he says they all feel heavy. So, and he's right. You can weigh these on a regular bathroom scale, a regular digital bathroom scale, and that's what I do. There's no need to guess. You can actually weigh them. When I squish them together, to answer somebody's question, my joinery is not perfect, and you put them together and you think, I've pushed the boxes together, why is there still a gap? Well, I don't want a gap, so I'll put a bit of cardboard between that to overcome it, to prevent the wind whistling through. I tip the boxes a little forward towards the entrance so that the water will run out if there's any melting condensation in the spring and doesn't cool in the hive. And I feel sorry for the colonies on the end and add insulation to the sides of those as well. And whether that's necessary or whether it's a beekeeper feel-good intervention, I don't know. I use the top insulation year-round because it's a cheap outer cover, and then I'll wrap it. And the first few years, I used the old pond liner that we got, just the thick black pond liner, and I wrapped it with it overhanging down here, and nice little string job, just so that if the winter wind starts howling and pushing on here, then it wasn't going to work its way into the hive. And then what happened was a couple of years ago, I had one or two colonies where mice had found their way into the top. They actually ate their way down. They snuck up in here and ate their way down, and there was bits of styrofoam down, and boy was I irritated. And so I don't have a picture of that in this presentation, but what I do now is I keep to a group of 4, and I have a wooden plywood cover that just fits over the top of the 4 boxes so that the mice can't find their way in.
No, there you have all the entrances on one side.
Actually, there I don't, but now I do.
And you get them all the same color.
All the same color, yep.
And they're not going to drift.
This was my biggest mistake in beekeeping, was buying 5 gallons of hot pink paint from Home Depot. And so, but to your question, I don't have a drifting problem, because by the time I've stacked them together, it's cold and they're not flying. And when they start flying, what I'll do is, before I move them apart very far, I also in this but I have the same colour bricks. Now I invested in some red house bricks too. And so I'll go grey, red. And then maybe I'll put a rock and I'll put one on this side so they look different. And then when it gets warmer and they start to fly, I'll separate them apart. This is interesting. I use those plastic wine corks and cut a segment out of the top. And this wasn't intentional, but I noticed that when we get those days when it's 0 degrees, like 0 to 5 above or 0 below, this actual top hole actually freezes off altogether. And so whether that reduction in air circulation is I'd like to pretend that I thought of that, but no, I didn't. And I think it's probably helpful, but it's one of those things that we don't know. I think it may fall into the category of beekeeper feel good. But go ahead.
You said you put plywood on top of your insulation, your pink insulation?
Yes.
Don't the mice chew into the side of the...
I've got the plywood with an overhang, like an outer cover. I'm wrapping up and getting there quickly. I got permission from a guy from Canada to include this photo. This is how he uses traditional outer covers if you don't want to go the mice route. He's actually put a piece of insulation in there, and these sides of these hives can now put together. And so my parting shot is the current model of beekeeping doesn't sit well with me. I want us to keep our bees alive, and I believe we can do it with nucs and brood breaking. Sideliners and hobbyists are missing out on an opportunity to develop a local bee stock that works for our region. There is no incentive for anybody else to do it. This method is replicable and adaptable. California's bees don't get much of a brood break, ours do. I believe it's a lost opportunity not to take advantage of this by establishing colonies as nucs with a summer brood break and our delicious winter brood break, and we ourselves should breed bees that thrive here from bees that have shown they can thrive here. Instead of just leaning on a chemical crutch, let's lean on the summer brood break and combine it with the mother of all brood breaks, winter, until we ourselves, local non-migratory beekeepers, have developed the bee that we want. All right, that's it.
You talk about your summer brood break. Do you have, what do you do with your queen when you take her out?
She never goes back. She never goes back.
What do you do with it?
Oh, you're just saying when you get that brood break when you set up the new.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So sometimes I'll keep her aside, and then sometimes I forget about her and she swarms, and that's a mistake. So I don't usually try to do that. What I'll do with it is I'll have her in reserve, and then if I go queenless somewhere, I'll put her there. Or conversely, if one of those nucs doesn't mate, she might go back into that hive.
And that's just the queen you deal with, because the box, the nuc that you start with the old queen is basically a mite bomb, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's a mite bomb.
Yeah.
So either that box goes away, or you split it up.
Well, you've taken away most of them.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Have you decided on a genetic race of bees that this system works best with for you?
I've decided to mostly work with the bees I have. I tried Minnesota Hygienics, but they didn't work for me. I found subsequent generations got hotter and hotter. So I went with Carniolans. I went with some bees that I cut out of a tree, but I'm not such a selective beekeeper that I can pretend I've still got those genetics. I've used some VSH, and I think I'll probably use some VSH again. But it's hard to tell. I wanted to try some of those ankle biters out of curiosity, but
the Italians that you get with those packages that you first purchased, did you see the noticing difference that sometimes they never shut down through the winter, so this program may not be applicable with that Italian race?
I didn't see that, but my practice is not like Mel's. By the time I've gone to seal all these up like this, I'm not opening them. So I don't go poking in the brood nest until like March. So if they were still brooding, I wouldn't know.
So the second year, you're nuking one the first year.
Yeah.
From splits. The second year, those are your honey production hives. Am I understanding correctly that you're basically sacrificing those because you understand without any sort of treatment that they are going to succumb to Varroa?
Pretty much.
So if I understand you,
yeah.
These gentlemen are saying you're basically creating Varroa bombs. Isn't that not affecting the rest of your apiaries?
That's interesting. Actually, no, because I've actually got nukes and production hives in the same apiary, and I manage the entrances to my colonies well. And so when they talk about the Varroa bomb, they talk about your colonies being robbed out by other colonies. That doesn't happen. The colonies that die of Varroa, I find, die in the early part of the winter.
No, the colony that's got the original queen
Yeah.
is full of Varroa, and more so than the starts, because they've got a brood break.
Mm-hmm.
Such a collapse.
Yeah. Now
they migrate out.
You do take the queen with, say, one frame of brood, so you lessened the amount of Varroa in that new.
Yeah. And the other thing I do, which I'll talk about later, is I also do drone brood removal. And so I'll put empty. The only wooden frames I've got in my apiary, in my brood boxes, are frames like this that have got popsicle sticks. And then when the colony is growing in the spring, I'll put one of these in and cut out the drone brood as it seals. And that helps. And I haven't seen, when I started doing that, I no longer saw the first couple of years. I'll get back here. Oh, what the heck? The first couple of years, I actually saw, hang on, excuse me. First couple of years I was seeing, am I going the right way? Yeah, I'm going the wrong way. First couple of years, I was seeing the traditional parasitic mite syndrome thing, where it's snot brood or whatever you want to call it. Since I started with the drone removal and doing Mel's method, I just don't see that. So the colonies that die in the early part of the winter when they're not flying and nobody's robbing them anyway. I've lost my train of thought here.
Adrian, you mentioned your frames. You're using Man Lake all plastic. Can I take a look at that frame quick?
Yeah, and I put wax on it too.
That's okay. I think this is a small cell frame.
Correct.
So you didn't say you were using small cell, but you are using small cell.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And my theory on that is the jury is out on small cell. And so, but if I wanted any, if there are any benefits, I want them. And these frames are much more economical than the wooden frames. Yeah. Kelly, am I running on too much now? Should we be? How are we doing?
Good.
Good. Any more questions?
Would you talk a bit more about your use of drone trapping in spring? When? How long?
Yeah. Up until in the spring, when the colony, when the bees have two goals. The underwintered colony, let's call it, wants to build up and survive the winter, and the overwintered colony wants to swarm. So to that end, they start making drones. So if you give them a place to work and something to do, like Mel says, giving them direction, then they'll be occupied and they're less likely to swarm away quickly. So I start when the temperatures are warmer, sometime April, May, depending how it feels to me, based upon what the weather's coming up, and I'll take away a frame and put in a drone frame. Now There's another method, a Dutch method I'll talk about this afternoon. I'm still experimenting with, and but this is just to keep them going. Yep.
Adrian, are you still weighing your hives?
I weigh them in the fall, yes, but I haven't weighed them in the spring because now I know how much they use.
Have you seen, rather than moving everything onto a bathroom scale, just using a little luggage scale on one end and getting a...
That would work if I had a flat base, but I'm on my 2 4x4 posts. So I worry, I have been known to tip a hive off a 4x4 post, and it's nothing I want to repeat.
Okay.